My name is Julian Carlson. With my partners Matthew Gallipo and Dylan Verdi, we constructed this puzzle piece poster to teach you folks about housing segregation and what it really means. What is housing segregation? Well, I'm glad you asked. Housing segregation isn't a simple black and white answer. It's a complex thing that has many factors that led to this core problem. The reason we're teaching you guys about housing segregation is because we're doing the code expedition as an 11th grade class. The code is an overarching expedition that we've been working on that covers racial issues in America, and housing segregation is just one of the issues that falls under that category. Learning about the code, we're learning about racial issues, but that doesn't mean everything we're learning about is overtly racist. For example, the GI Bill is not a racist issue, it just happened to play into the fact that leads into housing segregation, which is a racial issue. While something like sundown towns, that is a racist issue. Our project's a puzzle because each term is a piece that's interconnected to leading to housing segregation. So for example, block busting. That's an issue where realtors would tell white folks to sell their homes because black folks are moving into their town. And the Highway Act is where the highways were being built in between poor and rich communities. And the rich communities usually happen to be white, while the poor communities predominantly were black, or Hispanic or other minorities. While contract buying is the thing where realtors would get minorities to sell their homes and put into an unfair contract. So moving way back to the GI Bill. The GI Bill is a bill that's passed that for soldiers who served during World War II, which were predominantly white, could gain the benefits after coming home. They would have education, housing, and be provided money. So it's not a negative bill or a racial bill per se, but most of the soldiers were white, so they were retrieving most of the benefits, so other people and minorities were not receiving the same benefits. Moving on to gentrification, this is an issue that's very controversial because on one hand, you're taking a poor community that the buildings are drab and worn down and not very nice, and then you're turning them into these nice, clean, wealthy-looking buildings. Gentrification is a very controversial issue. It's when you go into a poor community, poor neighborhood, and take these old rundown buildings where it's very cheap to live, and you make them nice, and it's wealthy people start coming in and the money starts flowing. The issue is, the people who used to live there before can no longer afford to live there. So you're kicking out the original residents there. So those poor people, who are predominantly minorities, are being kicked out by the white people who can afford the more higher price of living. The Public Works Administration is an administration that budgeted several billions of dollars to be spent on the construction of public works as a means to provide employment, stabilize purchasing power, and improve public welfare as a contribution to the revival of America. But all this was going towards was white communities, not as an overtly racist thing. So, not exactly white, but middle upper class, so to speak. So, sundown towns, that's a crazy town. To think about something like this happening today is insanity. There are towns where white folks would not let black people in their town after night, or other minorities.
Racial Covenant prohibited certain minorities from buying houses in areas, as it said in the deed of the house, that they were not allowed to. This was done to keep white communities white. Federal Housing Administration. The Federal Housing Administration, generally known as FHA, provides mortgage insurance on loans made by FHA-approved lenders throughout the United States and its territories. And they cause more segregation issues by making home more accessible to white middle-class families. Wealth gap, aka wealth inequality, is the unequal distribution of assets among residents of the United States. Wealth includes values of homes, automobiles, personal items, valuables, businesses, savings, and investments. Minorities are more likely to be on the lower end of that wealth spectrum, which means they're more likely unable to afford nice housing. Steering, an unlawful practice that includes any words or actions by a real estate sales representative or broker that are intended to influence the choice of a prospective buyer or tenant. Steering violates federal fair housing provisions that prescribe discrimination in the sale or rental of housing. Steering used to be legal and was used to steer minorities away from white communities. Redlining is a discriminatory practice in which banks, insurance companies, etc. would refuse or limit loans, mortgages, insurance, etc. within specific geographic areas, especially minority neighborhoods. The Negro Motors Green Book was one of the best known of the African American travel guides. It guided African Americans to where they could go and what places are dangerous for them, keeping them out of white areas that could be threatening to them. White flight was the migration of whites out of integrated communities and city centers to homogeneous suburban developments. The government had explicit policies of not insuring suburban mortgages for African Americans.
Thank you for watching our video.